Have you ever stopped yourself mid-sentence and noticed that the words coming out of your mouth sound totally nonsensical if they were to be taken literally? Many of the most popular sayings were born hundreds of years ago, in a world with older technology and a different way of living life day to day. Today, I'm taking a closer look at these phrases to figure out where they came from and why they continue to emerge in our usage to this day, despite their literal meanings making no sense. I'm Mike with List 25, and here are 25 idioms that make no sense. And you know what else doesn't make sense? You not clicking that like button and that notification bell and all that fun stuff, so do all that. It really helps the channel. That being said, let's go. 25. Sick as a dog. In our modern world, dogs are the most pampered creatures on the planet. They have gourmet food, fancy beds, and more Instagram followers than most people in your friend group. But go back to the 1600s, and dogs had a very different public image. They had a reputation of being filthy little scavengers that spent time rolling around garbage heaps and carrying a whole host of nasty diseases. The phrase, sick as a dog, derived from this older view, where comparing someone to a dog meant pointing out all of their worst possible qualities. Dogs would commonly live outside in dire conditions, which made them mangier and more sicker than today's award-winning well-groomed pooches you might imagine prancing around at the Westminster Dog Show. Attitudes towards dogs back then is also illustrated in other sayings from that era, like, I'm in the doghouse if you were in trouble. Back then, all dogs pretty much looked sick, so there was no need for any explanation. According to Entom Online, dog was used abusively as early as the year 1200, or contemptuously as a mean, worthless fellow, currish, sneaking scoundrel. It had the playfully abusive sense of a sport, a gallant from the 1610s. When someone was described this way, it usually meant they were violently ill. This wasn't the kind of mild head cold you could work through. I'm talking about the sort of gut-wrenching, floor-hugging illness that makes you consider rewriting your will. Today, the phrase seems odder because our opinions of dogs have changed for the better. Now they symbolize loyalty, companionship, and unconditional love. Hearing sick as a dog probably makes most people imagine a golden retriever with a warm blanket over its shoulders, not a wet, disease-ridden critter roaming through an alley gutter. 24. Sweating like a pig. The science is in. Pigs really don't sweat at all. In fact, they have so few sweat glands that when they get hot, they choose to roll around in the mud or a puddle of water to cool off. So if you imagine yourself appearing more porcine by sweating like a pig, you're already heading in the wrong direction from a biology standpoint. This phrase actually has nothing to do with the animal at all. It comes from the process of smelting iron. Pig iron is a form of iron produced in a blast furnace, named for its casting method into molds, which looks like a mother sow and its piglets. When molten pig iron cooled, droplets of moisture would appear on the surface as it solidified. Workers called this sweating. Once the iron had sweated, it was safe to move. Over time, this phrase became more common in everyday language, but the reference to metalworking was forgotten. At some point, people began assuming it referred to actual pigs. In reality, the only thing pigs and sweat have in common is that both words happen to be in this phrase. So the next time someone tells you they're sweating like a pig, you can just point out that they're actually sweating like a big lump of iron. 23. Bite the bullet. A hospital alone shows what war is. The book All Quiet on the Western Front set the scene for World War I amputees. It was gruesome. But the myth of the phrase bite the bullet imagines the scenario in one such old battlefield hospital where anesthesia has not been invented yet, and a surgeon is about to saw a soldier's leg off. To cope with the pain, the doctor tells the soldier to bite down on a bullet so he doesn't bite his own tongue off instead. It's pretty dramatic, gritty, and a terrifying scene to imagine. The truth is, there's not much evidence that people actually did this. Bullets in the past were made of soft lead, which could deform, break, or be accidentally swallowed. Leather straps or wooden sticks were much more practical for giving patients something to clench. Still, the imagery was too powerful to ignore. The phrase came to mean facing pain or an unpleasant situation with courage. The earliest version of bite the bullet, meaning to do something difficult or unpleasant after delay or hesitation, is from 1891. This was taken even more literally in the 1975 film Bite the Bullet. The plot of the movie involves a character who, suffering from a toothache and unable to receive proper dental care, fashioned a bullet casing to cover the exposed nerve of his aching tooth. Even if the literal action is dangerous and impractical, it stuck around because it perfectly captures the idea of bracing yourself for something you can't avoid. And a little alliteration didn't hurt either. 22. Happy as a clam. Clams have no visible emotions. They don't smile, they don't frown, they don't throw parties when they're feeling festive. So why do we compare happiness to a clam? Well, our friends at Edom Online tell us that being happy as a clam began meaning content and pleased by 1833, and was usually said to be in reference to the mollusk's presumed mental state at high tide, when it can't be dug up and eaten. The actual phrase was happy as a clam at high tide, when they're protected from seagulls and humans with buckets alike. That was about as good as life got for a clam. Over time, the at high tide part dropped away, leaving us with a phrase that seems completely random without context. Now it's just one of those expressions people repeat because it sounds cheerful. The truth is, clams might be perfectly content, but we have no way of knowing. They might be the most stressed out shellfish in the sea for all we know. I mean, if you were a clam in Boston dodging a pot of chowder, that'd probably be the case. 21. The apple of my eye. You. Now you're special. I mean, come on. You're the bee's knees, the cat's pajamas. But the apple of my eye? When someone calls you the apple of their eye, it may sound like a compliment that seems effusive with poetic exaggeration, but can you picture the image of an actual apple crammed into someone's eyeball? This phrase comes from Old English, when the word apple was used to describe any small and round object. The phrase was a reference to the pupil of the eye, which was seen as rather precious because it was literally central to eyesight. To call someone the apple of your eye meant that they were as treasured as your ability to see the world. Now that's special indeed. Over the centuries, the anatomical meaning fell away, and people started imagining fruit instead. This made the phrase sound sweeter, but also a bit more puzzling. The phrase has become less about biology and more about showing affection to the most cherished people in your life, but the apple eyeball mental image most people likely still think up is bizarre. You know what? Maybe next time I want to tell somebody they're really important to me, I'll just tell them, hey, you're the pupil in the center of my eyeball, which is quite important to my eyesight, which is so very important to my life, not unlike yourself. 20. The proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the pudding is actually a shorter version of the much older proverb, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. This phrase didn't mean proof as in evidence, like in a courtroom, but more like a test. Back in the 17th century, pudding wasn't the sweet dessert we know today, but a savory sausage-like meat dish that could hide questionable ingredients. The only way to know if it was decent or safe was to taste it. In other words, results are the real test, not appearances. And it probably looked pretty questionable too. Over time, the phrase traveled through several English-speaking cultures and got cut down to its modern version, the proof is in the pudding. Unfortunately, that kind of makes it sound like some kind of dessert-based detective work, which is why people sometimes misunderstand it. The old saying meant that something's quality or value is proven by experiencing it, not just by looking at it or talking about it. So the next time someone says the proof is in the pudding, you could impress them with some etymology trivia. It's not about dessert at all. 19. Do not look a gift horse in the mouth. Back when people just gave each other horses as common gifts, checking a horse's mouth was the usual way to see how old and healthy it was. If someone handed you a horse and immediately looked inside its mouth, it was like saying, thanks, but I wonder if this horse is actually good. That was considered rude back then. Even if you were just getting your little girl a pony for her birthday. Which, if you think about it, doesn't really sound so entitled if people were just trading horses around all the time. This idiom began with the practice of checking a horse's teeth to determine its age and health. Today, it'd be like receiving a brand new car and immediately checking it for scratches. It was rude because the point was showing some gratitude, not verifying the value of this thing you got for free. What, are you going to tell your friend it's a lousy gift if you don't like what you see? That's what it seems like. This proverb dates back to around the 5th century. A Latin text written by St. Jerome in 400 said, Noli equi dentes in spicere donati, which literally means never inspect the teeth of a given horse. It was popular throughout medieval Europe and became a staple of English sayings by the 16th century. If we were to update it for these days, it might be something like, don't check the battery life on a free phone. 18. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Try doing this literally, and you'll quickly see it's impossible. Bootstraps are small loops on the tops of boots designed to help you pull them on. If you try to lift yourself off the ground with them, you won't get any higher. You'll just look like you're attempting a very crappy magic trick. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps sounds like motivational advice, but its true origins are far more ironic. It was originally used to describe an absurd or futile task, like saying someone could lift themselves into the air by tugging on their shoelaces. Early books and newspapers in the 19th century used it to lampoon ridiculous ideas or claims of self-reliance. By the early 20th century, though, the meaning had shifted. In the US, the phrase became a symbol of rugged individualism, and they decided to claim ownership of it. It was used to encourage people to rise above poverty or hardship through their own grit and effort. But the original wording suggested the polar opposite. This change mirrors a cultural shift towards celebrating self-made success, making the phrase a motivational mantra rather than a sarcastic jab. These days, pull yourself up by your bootstraps is so common that people often forget it was sarcastic and not really meant to be taken literally. It carries a message of resilience, but it can also oversimplify the challenges people face, as not every problem can be solved by sheer determination alone. The next time someone says it, you can smile knowing it began as a joke about doing the impossible, because everybody needs somebody. 17. Have your cake and eat it too. This one is a case of bad word order. Having cake and eating it are not mutually exclusive. The actual contradiction is wanting to eat your cake and still have it afterward. Have your cake and eat it too sounds like a sweet deal, but it originally pointed out the impossibility of keeping something while also using it up. The phrase first appeared in English in the 1500s, and back then it was often flipped. People said, you can't eat your cake and have it too. That order makes more sense, because once you eat your cake, it's gone. Over time, the words got swapped, and the modern version stuck, even though it sounds a bit backwards. Writers like Thomas Cromwell used this proverb in letters, and it became a popular way to call someone out for wanting contradictory things. Historically, cake wasn't an everyday dessert, but a special treat made with expensive ingredients. Wanting to have and eat cake was a metaphor for trying to enjoy luxury without sacrifice. It was a polite way of saying, you can't have it both ways. The new version sounded better, so people kept saying it, even though it made the logic get fuzzier over time. It's used to describe wanting two incompatible things, like spending all your money and still having a full bank account. The cake may be metaphorical, but the message is the same. You cannot use something up and still keep it. 16. Pushing the envelope. Without context, this sounds like a very dull postal task. Why would moving a paper envelope be a bold or daring act? The answer comes from aviation. In flight, the envelope refers to the limits of an aircraft's capabilities, like speed, altitude, and maneuverability. Pushing the envelope means testing or slightly exceeding those limits to see what's possible. The term gained wider popularity thanks to Tom Wolfe's 1979 book The Right Stuff, which chronicled the early days of the US space program. Wolfe told the tale of daring test pilots and astronauts who pushed the envelope when they were breaking speed and altitude records. By the time the movie adaptation was released in 1983, the phrase had entered mainstream language, taking on a metaphorical meaning of pushing limits and venturing into new territory. Today, pushing the envelope is used quite often outside the cockpit. You can hear it said most by innovators, athletes, and artists who challenge boundaries and redefine what's possible. Its roots in high-risk aviation gave it an adventurous edge, making it more than just a cliche. When someone says they're pushing the envelope, they're channeling the spirit of fearless pilots who risked everything just to see how far they could go. 15. You have tomatoes on your eyes. This German idiom paints a very strange picture. You have tomatoes on your eyes might sound like a strange culinary disaster, but it's actually a German idiom. Tomaten auf den Augen haben, It means you're not seeing something obvious, as if your vision is blocked by two big red tomatoes. The expression likely comes from early 20th century German slang, where tomatoes symbolize swollen or red eyes. Over time, the colorful imagery stuck, and the phrase evolved into a playful way to tease someone for missing something right in front of them. This saying captures a very human experience, like those times when you're searching frantically for your keys, only to realize, oh, they're in your hand. Or when you overlook something so obvious that everyone else notices it right away. English speakers would normally say something like, if it were a snake, it would have bitten you. The German idiom is a gentler way of saying, open your eyes. 14. I only understand the train station. This is another German phrase, originally Ich verstehe nur Bahnhof, meaning I don't understand anything. Literally translated, it makes no sense at all. The expression originated with World War I soldiers who were exhausted and only wanted to return home. When people talked about anything else, they would say they only understood train station, meaning the only thing they wanted was to get to the station and leave. I mean, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. This phrase is a perfect example of how idioms capture culture. In a world before smartphones and modern transportation networks, the train station represented freedom, going home, and familiarity. Saying, I only understand the train station, painted a vivid picture of someone so fixated on leaving or so overwhelmed that nothing else made sense. It stuck in the German language because it was relatable and easy to imagine. Without that context, it sounds really random. But in its original form, it was less about being confused and more about being completely uninterested in the conversation. 13. To slide in on a shrimp sandwich. This Swedish saying sounds like the setup for a bizarre party trick, but it's actually a sharp commentary on privilege. The phrase is att glida en på en macka, which literally means to slide in on a shrimp sandwich. It's used to describe someone who achieves success in life or enjoys special advantages without having to put in very much effort. It's a way of saying someone has coasted into their position in life, not through hard work, but because they had an easy and comfortable path laid out for them. In Sweden, shrimp sandwiches have long been associated with luxury, indulgence, and special occasions. Not being the cheapest snack, they're a symbol of refinement and status. So saying someone slid in on a shrimp sandwich creates a vivid image. A person gliding through life on a cushion of wealth, privilege, or connections. It's playful, but also a little biting, like calling someone out for never having to struggle for their achievements. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to go surfs up on a lobster roll. 12. Butter someone up. Literally, this sounds like you're smearing dairy on a person, which is not the best way to win them over. Butter me up might sound like someone's trying to turn you into a slice of toast, but the phrase actually comes from an ancient tradition of flattery. It likely comes from an ancient Indian or Tibetan custom of throwing butterballs at statues of the gods as an offering. Tibetans herd yak to support their traditional nomadic lifestyle that dates back centuries, and their butter is treated as sacred. They even carved sculptures of butter to offer to deities. This act was meant to curry favor and show devotion. By the time the phrase made its way to English, it had shed the religious ritual and turned into a playful metaphor for flattering someone. If you butter someone up, you're laying on compliments thick and smooth, like spreading butter over warm bread. Over time, the idea of using butter to gain favor shifted into a metaphor for flattering someone to get what you want. Now, most people think of it as sweet-talking someone. So when someone says, "You're just buttering me up," just remember, the phrase has been seasoning conversations for centuries. 11. Cut the mustard. Mustard is pretty wet and liquid-like as it is, so cutting it is not really that much of a challenge. So why doesn't the logic of this idiom cut the mustard? Well, one theory is that it comes from cut the muster, a military term for passing inspection. Over time, it may have been altered through mishearing. Another theory is that it refers to mustard as a strong, high-quality spice, so cutting the mustard meant meeting a high standard. The phrase may date back to the late 19th century, and while no one's entirely sure where it came from, One theory suggests it evolved from the slang mustard, meaning something excellent or high quality, so you're basically calling someone hot stuff. To cut the mustard, used in the early 20th century, meant as a slang to mean a genuine article or the best thing, on the notion of it meaning that which entices flavor. In the novel by O. Henry, Cabbages and Kings, he wrote, "I'm not headlined in the bills, but I'm the mustard in the salad dressing just the same." The idea that something just doesn't cut the mustard first popped up in American newspapers in the 1890s, often in a playful or sarcastic tone. By the early 20th century, it had firmly taken root in everyday speech, and cut the mustard became the go-to way to describe someone performing well or being up to standard. Over time, it even inspired spin-offs like "doesn't quite cut the mustard," a polite way of saying, someone's not quite there yet. 10. Mad as a Hatter. There's a place like no place on earth, a land full of wonder, mystery, and danger. Some say to survive it, you need to be as mad as a hatter, which luckily, I am. But what does it mean to be mad as a hatter, and how is a raven like a writing desk? Who's to say which is which? Without history, being proclaimed mad as a hatter just sounds like an insult to the hat makers of the world. But did someone just magically pull this idiom out of a hat? Prior to the 20th century, hatters used mercury nitrate in the felting process. Prolonged exposure led to mercury poisoning, which caused tremors, mood swings, and hallucinations. Hatters really did develop symptoms that made them appear mad, but how did linguistics come into play? Mad as a hatter was originally a Scottish phrase from 1829 and meant someone was demented or violently insane. In 1837, it could mean as enraged or violently angry. An even earlier expression was to do something like a hatter, as in a frenzy or energetically. The phrase even spawned the malapropism "mad as an adder is" by 1843. The word in the phrase is perhaps from Scots term hatter, which meant disorder or swarm as a verb to bully, harass. The word could also be in onomatopoeic formation, similar to words like batter and clatter. Mad as a Hatter is most often associated with the eccentric character from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which is whimsical but leaves out the word's origins about mercury-induced madness and Scottish etymology. 9. Fly off the handle. Back in the 1800s, axes were often handmade, and their wooden handles weren't always perfectly fitted. If the head of the axe wasn't secured properly, it could actually fly off during use, turning a day of chopping wood into a high-stakes game of dodgeball. People started using the phrase to describe someone showing sudden, explosive anger, kind of like an axe head flying through the air all of a sudden. The expression gained more traction in 19th century America, showing up in newspapers and books as a colorful way to describe someone losing their temper. After all, nothing captures a violent outburst like imagining a sharpened blade rocketing across a room because of one careless swing. The phrase stuck, and its origins remind us that even everyday chores in the past had life or death risks. And now, we're going to fly through the rest of this list. 8. To wear a cat on one's head. This Japanese idiom means pretending to be nicer or calmer than you really are. The phrase makes you imagine. Not the cat in the hat, but the cat as a hat. Such a soft and harmless looking creature on the outside, even if underneath it all, you may not be so gentle. Cats in Japanese culture are often symbols of cuteness and calmness, so wearing one suggests you're putting on a false front. Without that cultural connection, the phrase makes no sense at all. 7. Burn the midnight oil. Before electricity, people who needed light after dark used oil lamps. Staying up late to work meant literally burning oil through the night. The phrase became a symbol of dedication and effort. If you were burning the midnight oil, you were putting in extra hours to get something important done. Now, with electric lights everywhere, the image is outdated. People still use it, but without that historical context, it sounds like an environmentally questionable habit. 6. Keep your eyes peeled. This one sounds painful. Peeling your eyes is not something anyone should attempt. It comes from older phrases like keep your eyes skinned, meaning to keep your eyelids open so you can see everything. Peeled in this sense meant uncovered or unobstructed. Without that explanation, the literal reading is disturbing. Still, it remains a common way to tell someone to stay alert. 5. Close, but no cigar. If you miss a goal by a small margin, you might hear this phrase. But cigars aren't the usual prize for almost winning. The saying comes from early 20th century carnival games where cigars were sometimes given out as rewards. If you nearly won, the operator might say, "Close, but no cigar." Today, the carnivals no longer think a thick roll of tobacco is a great prize to pass out. Now, it's just a way to say, almost. Though the cigar reference reminds us of a time of nostalgia before we knew the dangers of smoking, and when the thought of smoking felt more novel and fun. You can thank marketing for that association. 4. Pardon my French. People use this after swearing, but there's no French involved. In the 19th century, English speakers sometimes used actual French words to sound sophisticated, and to give their vocabulary a sense of a certain je ne sais quoi, and then apologized in case the listener didn't understand. Over time, the apology became a sarcastic cover for profanity instead. Now, most people using it have no idea it ever had anything to do with the French language. It survives purely as a humorous way to excuse the use of foul language. Ah, shucks. Pardon my French. 3. Butterfingers. Calling someone Butterfingers means they're clumsy and drop things a lot. Literally, it makes you picture someone with slippery, greasy hands. The term's been around since at least the 1600s and was popularized in sports to describe players who could not seem to hold on to the ball. The butter was just a metaphor for the sense of slipperiness. The funny mental image is part of the reason it's stuck around. It's both an insult and a joke rolled into one. 2. By the skin of your teeth. Teeth do not have skin, just in case you didn't already know that. That's why this phrase is so strange if you think about it literally. It comes from the Bible in the book of Job, where the line, "I have escaped with the skin of my teeth," was meant as poetic imagery for barely surviving. The exact wording apparently stuck, even though it, doesn't match up with real-life human anatomy. Today, it's a way to say you just barely made it. Even if biology says the phrase makes no sense, it works as an image of a close call. 1. Keep your nose to the grindstone. Pressing your nose to a grindstone sounds dangerous and unpleasant. The phrase likely came from either blacksmithing or milling, where a grindstone was used to sharpen tools or grind grain. It meant working with your head down and focusing on the task. Another theory suggests that it refers to getting your eyes, and thus your nose, very close to the stone to perform precise work. Today, it remains a way to encourage someone to keep working hard, even if the actual act would ruin your sinuses forever. And that's all I have for you today. Now, idioms show us that our language is living, always evolving, and often pretty weird. What makes sense to one generation can sound completely confusing to the next. Or vice versa. But they connect us to our history, to culture, and sometimes to the weirdest thoughts you could possibly imagine. And now that you know the backstory behind these phrases, you can use them with confidence. Or at least with the knowledge that you're not actually sweating like a pig. And let me know in the comments which idiom on this list you think was the weirdest. And yes, sliding in on a shrimp sandwich is a perfectly acceptable answer. And what idiom do you use the most? Which one's your favorite? Again, let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, notification bell. And I'll catch you guys next time. I'm going to go hit the road. Just going to take off. Make like a tree and leaf. I don't know if that's an actual idiom. All right, bye.